Bertie, thank you so much for that presentation. Very stimulating. Thank you for your candidness. Just to remind us, the Citizen Assembly, about our terms of reference. So we've been convened to consider the type of directly elected mayor. We're not being asked, is it a good or bad idea? Just to remind ourselves why we're here. So the terms of reference are to consider the type of directly elected mayor and, alluding to some of Bertie's points there, the local government structures best suited for Dublin. And that speaks to some of the points that Bertie made there. Okay, so it's great news that we have 30 minutes now with our Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, and we're going to we have a number of questions coming in already from the previous session that relate to Bertie's presentation. So please, facilitators, if you have more questions, please type them up on our Google document, and the Secretary General, Art, and myself will moderate. So the first question comes from Table 7 and Valerie.
Good morning, Bertie. You've kind of answered the question we had, so could we make up another one, please? We want to ask, could you explain how the federal system works? Because we were going to ask about, what resistance you get from the government, if we try to devolve powers, but you've more or less explained that to us. So now we have a new one. Could you explain how the federal system works, please?
Yeah, I think there are good examples around the place. We had this debate back in millennium year 2000. The Act was 2001, and the debate was around when we had Dublin City Corporation, which I was a member of, and we had the County Council, which used to be the old system. We talked about what way could you have the two of them amalgamated or integrated, and then we went a different road. We went to Fingal and on there in Dublin South. But if there are examples of where you could have members from there's a number of systems, but the one that I liked at the time, you could have people from each of the councils. A number, you'd have one organisation, but you have maybe representatives from each of the councils that would become kind of an executive of Dublin, a smaller group, and then I think you're into a position where you have a dedicated group who would have to have more resources, more time. The San Francisco model, where the mayor gets elected and also the 8 or 9 other people get elected. And they run the city, and San Francisco, I'm sure many of you have been in it, they run it well. So I think that's the kind of a system that I thought at the time. That we didn't do it. We didn't do it because we hadn't the preparatory work done. But if you had, let's call it an executive, right, that would cover all the existing councils, and that they were the people who were properly funded and resourced and had powers to do things. Then you would have a group, and maybe out of that you could have into the future a supremo, an elected leader or CEO or mayor or whatever, probably CEO at the start. And I think that's because I think if Dublin keep on going the way we are, dividing ourselves into lots, I mean, we're going to be a big capital, and it should be possible for us to have one entity. So that's the federal thing, where you have the people coming from each of the systems with power. And there's plenty of good examples. I'm sure your advisor group have seen federal systems work. And I know the documents from 2000 of the federal system are in the department. And I think that could be a work. So you could have maybe 4 from each or 5 from each, doesn't matter, but you would have Dublin County run by an executive that would cover all of the city and county. I keep saying city, but I'm talking about county, the county. And I think that's a workable system. And we seriously talked about it 20 years ago. And I do have a bit of regrets that we didn't try that at the time. We got ourselves tied up in the mayor bit rather than the system bit, which you're looking at both.
Thanks for that, Bertie. And thanks for the question, Valerie. We'll go to table 10. One of our councillors, Barry.
Thank you, Bertie. The question I have is, in your opinion, who are the biggest obstacles to devolution? Is it the politicians or the civil service?
I think both, to be honest with you. I mean, politicians sometimes, they have, you know, as I think Mark said earlier on, they had the powers and they don't want to give over the powers. And often the officials don't. We've a bad habit in this country, but when we try to pass something on, instead of passing on the section or a department and it moves from A to B, what happens is it moves from A to B with nearly a new staff. The HSE is a good example of that. We tried to bring it all together, and what we did, we upped the staff and we upped the bureaucracy, and now they're trying to regionalise it again 20 years later. So I think there is there is a reluctance by politicians, and there's a reluctance by officials. But I have to say, when it comes to big projects, you take Dublin is a serious capital. I'm not sure what the population figure will be in the new census when it comes out, or maybe it's published the other day. But it's a big international city now with, you know, 100 nationalities or more in it. You know, big universities. So there are a lot of big projects, and where we're facing into the future, the period that you're trying to plan for. We don't have within the system the people to do these big projects. So more and more we're bringing in, you know, experts, and that's the right thing to do, to advise us on that. But what you don't want, you want to avoid that experts are being brought in by the city or the county, and experts are being brought in by departments. And sometimes experts are being brought in by ministers. I mean, you want to streamline the system. So I think as far as is possible, we need a system that is far more coherent than the present one. And, you know, in some ways, some people give out about the present city manager that he's too much power. But I think your question, who's the biggest obstacle? I don't think they meaningfully do it. I think it's just a question. They look at the problem and they say the problem is so big we can't give it to them. That's really where they're coming from, rather than from being bad about it and we want to hold on to our job, Barry. And I think that's the difficulty. So you need a system where the experts can be working for that group, and not bits of things working for everybody. And that's, I think, the challenge.
Thanks for the question, Barry. Now we'll go to table 12 and Brenda.
How do you see the efficiency of the service being improved by development?
By?
Development. Oh, development.
Yeah, I think if one person is responsible or one organisation is responsible, Brenda, that's the best way. I mean, the best efficiency if you've one, you know, one group or one body that make the decisions, and then everyone can blame them. But if you have, what tends to happen is if you have the Custom House and maybe the Ministerial's office and the City Council. But there normally is good. My experience is that the management of the City Council, in my day, the senior people that were there tended to come into government and tended to not just do what government asked, but to come in and say, this is what we're trying to do. And by and large, I think they do that, you know, fairly well. You know, in the past, if you get into all kind of difficulties, if politicians have too much involvement in planning, that created all kind of scandals and difficulties. So you don't want to go back into that. It's really that there's some group that make the power. We tend to have too many. If you look at the planning, what happens is Dublin Corporation make a planning decision. It goes to Blower Penola. Someone takes a judicial decision. Like that isn't something that happens in other countries. It's far more streamlined system. So you'd like to see devolution, that we can make decisions quicker. Like we're a serious, as we go forward, we're going to be a serious capital. Dublin is a serious capital. I mean, we've some of the biggest companies now in the world operating out. We're more and more European headquarters operating out of Dublin. We've now about 50 international companies who have their European headquarters in this county. So we have to be fit for purpose to be able to make our decisions and to be able to have a system that operates for that. It can't go on with 4 local authorities and kind of a bit of everyone doing their best, admittedly. It's not anybody's purposely doing a bad job, but to run that kind of a city, we need a fit for purpose system. And I think we want to get devolution that ultimately that there are people who make decisions, not for people that have to make decisions. I think that I don't mean for individuals, I mean for groups. So I think that's the issue, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. Now to table 6 and question from Paul.
Yeah, table 6. How's it going, Bertie? Actually, your presentation almost, it doesn't mean our question, because it came up before your presentation, that it's redundant necessarily. But I'd certainly personally like to ask a different question, but I guess I have to follow. Siemens were talking about democracy. I better follow the democracy of our table, even though the question came before. So the question was that devolution of responsibility or powers, whatever you want to call it, by definition, that should align itself with more accountability. Because you're just mentioning there actually one body, one group. But actually, once you do that for, and there was this inference in something you said about, the civil service, etc., not wanting, and ministers not wanting to pass on power because the job is too big for them. We have to deal with it. But that kind of centralization tends to lead to a lack of accountability rather than more accountability. So I'm just curious, do you think that devolution would not assist the principle of accountability?
I think, Paul, it's the city council, if you were to take the city council that I served on, or Dáil Éireann, where I spent a lifetime, there is accountability in our system, but sometimes at the end of a long career you look back. I used to always listen to the opposition in the Dáil. I would say, no, Taoiseach, you should be here far more hours answering questions. I used to do about 8 or 9 hours a week. And it was almost that if I spent any more hours talking to them, I'd be doing nothing. So I had nothing to be accountable for, because you have to go out and do the works to be answering. So I worry sometimes that in our system, we need to get on with the job. There's too many people looking over their shoulder all the time. Because we're a small country, not to mind what I said, we're double in size, or will double in size and small, but we're small. And there's sometimes there's almost, there's all the committees in the Dáil, as you know now, there's the committees. So I look at them more efficiently. How do we run this place? How do we make sure our public transport is good? How do we make sure our airport runs? How do we make sure our sewage and our water is good and clean? Like these are the big things. It's the accountability. There's loads of us. There's people in there asking questions about everything every day and looking over. There's freedom of information, and there's just so much. But sometimes it's been tied up, and it's the hours doing the work and doing the graph. We're very slow at taking big projects and taking them through. We're very slow at doing it, and it's not devolution is the problem with that, and it's not accountability is the problem with that. I just think there's too many people doing it, too many different agencies doing it, and whenever you're trying to, I remember when we started the Lewis, which works fairly well now, but God, it was pulling elephant's teeth trying to to get the thing going and get the thing moving. So I think that's it. I don't think it's the accountability, Paul. I just think it's the efficiency to get a system that you can do things quicker and cost effectively. Now, the councils have got far better. I think it was Mark said it earlier on. They've got far better at fixing contracts on time, on budget. We used to be horrendously poor at that one time. It's good now. So, listen, accountability is essential. We're not saying it's not, but I just think it's more the efficiency that I worry about going forward.
Next question, Paul. We'll go to table 2 now, and Lynn.
Thanks very much. Would Bertie Ahern comment on the, given his reservations about the idea of a celeb who would need electoral approval, would he comment on the current imbalance in power between local councillors and an unelected chief executive? Because we've had quite a bit of conversation about the disparity there. Thanks.
Yeah, it's Lynn, the CEO. The CEO is or the city manager, county manager. They have a lot of powers. There's no doubt about that. And I think a lot of those powers, they are answerable to the council. It doesn't stop the council from asking them questions and questioning decisions. I mean, just because they have the powers, and most city managers are very reluctant to do anything if they don't feel that they're carrying the council with them. There's a few examples around where there might be different, but by and large they're careful, to do that. But at least it's between the councillors and the manager, and they have it out. And the Lord Mayor chairs the meetings. Like the Lord Mayor, has a lot of powers in our present system. I always think that you don't have to have the actual power in a devolved power. Like if you're a Taoiseach, you're given a devolved power, and it's constitutionally you're given these powers. But as Lord Mayor, there's a whole lot of things a good Lord Mayor can do presently, and many mayors and Lord Mayors around the country do so. If you the Mansion House, you can pull people in. You can people always come. They'll have debates. They'll have decisions. They'll come up what's the best for Dublin, and all that can happen and has happened down the generations. So having somebody just elected, then you're off into another game. You're into that person has to be playing out to a huge public, and you'll have radio and TV and all those things on top of them. Now things have changed, admittedly. When I was in Dublin City Council, every single meeting there was journalists from the national newspapers used to attend. RTE had a correspondent at the meetings. Those things all kind of stop, so local authorities don't have that same interest by the maybe it's because they don't have as much powers as they should, but I'm not convinced of that. I mean, they're still making huge decisions. They're making huge decisions of where we should build. They're making huge decisions of the next office block. They're making where will Google go, where will Intel go, or wherever any of the big ones that are in Dublin. So I never felt, all I can tell you, I never felt that trying to deal with a non-elected CEO, city manager, was a problem. You were always able to talk to them. You were always able to put your position to them. If you asked me to honestly say, which I think Lynn, if you asked me to honestly say, would I find it easier to deal with the CEO or an elected person, I'd have to say it wouldn't have made any difference to me. I always felt I could deal with the unelected CEO about serious matters that in my city that didn't affect me. I have to say I never found that. I know it's easy to say, the unelected CEO, he went off and he made that decision. And sometimes councils do that. Now, no, most councils don't do that. We had great examples down the years. I suppose Wood Quay, for anyone who's old enough, there was war between officials and councillors on Wood Quay. But normally, and that's 40 years ago, normally there's not that much difference between councillors. And I think the way around that is empower more councillors, give councillors more help, more resources, so they can spend more time on things. And I am a big supporter of that. I think if we give our councillors more time, more resources, they'll do a good job.
Thanks, Bertie. We'll go to now table 1 and Lorraine, please. Got 10 minutes to go.
Thank you very much, Bertie. It's great to get your views and to learn from your experience. I understand that, delivering major capital projects like the Port Tunnel must be extremely difficult, and the idea of adding in a whole new layer of bureaucracy and stakeholders would make that even more difficult. And I can totally see why, you wouldn't want to do that. But I suppose my question is, but does that mean that, certain things couldn't be done differently or better? So if you look at education, for example, yes, of course, standards should be set nationally because all children should be able to enjoy the same standards, and teachers should be trained to the same level nationally. But does that mean that planning couldn't be devolved locally? And in my area, Dún Laoghaire County Council, we would often encounter problems where a school is needed, either primary or secondary level, and we and the community know it's needed, but the national office or department doesn't agree. So then there's a whole kind of campaign run by parents because they need a school building, and the council ends up having to sell a piece of land under pressure to meet a deadline of September when the school year returns. So I'm just asking, when it comes to education, could our planning, would it be better if it was done locally? So certain things kept nationally, but certain things done locally. Same for childcare. Massive shortage of childcare places in Dún Laoghaire County Council. And yes, of course, our standards should be managed nationally, and the service should be funded nationally, because there's no point in introducing new taxes locally, because obviously people wouldn't like that. But when it comes to planning for childcare, couldn't there be better linkages locally so that we don't have gaps? Because we have massive gaps at the minute in childcare provision. People just can't get access to childcare. So I'm just wondering, could aspects of these big policy areas be better managed locally? And it's the same with policing. We as councillors have to fight tooth and nail for community policing, and there's no real accountability there or anything. And I'm wondering if part of that budget, part of the budget for the guards was routed through the councils, would it just lead to a bit of better accountability and a bit of better response to an issue that really matters to people, community policing? Would it mean better accountability and mean that we have a little bit more power in how we ensure that money is allocated? So I guess my question is, yes, I understand when you're delivering major projects, you don't want more, from a top-down perspective, you don't want more stakeholders and barriers. However, from a citizen's perspective, is it better that there might be a little bit more local input for how some of these big areas are managed? And that's my question to you. Sorry, I don't think it's easy.
No, thanks, Lorraine. Listen, Lorraine, anything that makes things different and better, more efficient, easier to operate is a good idea. I mean, I think the childcare one, because the childcare budget is relatively new, it wouldn't be a difficult thing to have the national childcare system give the money out to counties. That wouldn't be a difficult thing to do. I think administratively, that's an easy one. We can see how it would operate in the departments, and that would be an easy one. Policing, a different thing, because the whole policing thing is built on operational arrangements by the Commissioner. And you remember a few years ago where a few politicians tried to save particular stations, how that blew up into a huge national question. So I think on policing. But in fairness to policing, in recent years, they are more open to talking directly to groups, and that's what I made a point earlier on about the area. I'm a great believer in the area groups, because I think and it works well in the city where, you know, you're not trying to deal with 1 million houses. You're dealing with the area groups of who's elected for that area, and that gets officialdom face to face with councillors talking about the issues. Of course, to do that, you're back to my question. You have to resource the council more, and that I'm afraid in favour of. Education, you see, this is a good one. You know, councillors have total control in the plan for an area that comes in front of the planning for the council. That stage to put in the school and to put in the play area, and it's at that planning area. It's that planning period where councillors today can say, we're not going to build those 500 houses unless we have a school on the site, that we allocate an area for a community centre. And that's happening now a bit better than it used to. But it's at that stage, but that power is there today. The councillors today can do that, so they don't have to devolve nothing. I mean, they have a direct input in any big planning development, that the facilities should be, you know, it used to be that way. Those of you again who are old enough, we built Tala back in the day, and then when they built Tala, they said, "Jeepers, where are we going to put the shopping centre? Where are we going to put the facilities?" And it took us a long time to do that. Now, I was part of the government to put in the hospital, the town centre, the education system, and it's grand today. But it was done the wrong way around. We built the houses and then start putting in the facilities. So it should be done. But that's a power that's there. That's a power today. It's a power that the councillors can discuss. You could argue maybe they can't force the planning official to do it, but I mean any of the big developments, and there's a few good ones now where they are doing that, and it should be. But the childcare one is by good example where that could be done, because the office isn't a huge office, and the grants could be given. And there are other ones like that in some of the sports grants, because sport is an area I'm keen on, and you know, some of the sports grants could be devolved easy enough out, that each area gets its sports grant. Now that's an area probably where you'd find the politician wouldn't like it, because the politician has a lot of control over where the grants go, but there's no reason why it couldn't be done. And they are important grants. So I think those areas, that's the 40% that comes from government. You know, there's lots of bits in that, but you know, maybe they're not, Lorraine, maybe they're not huge issues, but I think they're important ones.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine, for that question. So with 90 seconds to go, we're going to have our last question. And it was a question that Paddy asked our previous speaker, Dr. Mark Callanan. As Ireland, one of Ireland's key economic hubs, there's a shared context within the island of Ireland that Dublin is a key economic driver. However, this is not a competition about Dublin against the other great cities such as Limerick, Cork, Waterford, Galway or Belfast. It's about what's best for the island of Ireland. So, Paddy, could you just maybe ask your question, please, once again on table 3 to Bertie? Thanks.
Bertie, hi. Thanks for coming. The question I'd asked earlier was that if the powers were devolved to Dublin local authorities, would rural constituencies suffer financially, given that most of the wealth generated would be in Dublin?
Just before you answer that question, the fourth officials put the clock up. We're into your time, overtime. So this is the last question, the last answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and again thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing and the time you're dedicating to this purpose. I don't think there's a reason, Paddy, why it should. I mean, cabinet tables, ultimately the Department of Finance are doling out the resources. I think there's always a careful examination that there's a spread of resources. So I think there is. The reality is now that because Dublin is the capital and Dublin is a lot of the big companies and generating a lot of the corporation tax, that a lot of that money has to be spread around the country anyway. And, that's where the funds are coming from. So I don't think it should affect the resources in it. And cabinets are nearly always regionally spread, so they'll always be watching the reasons. But I suppose the last point I'd make, Chairman, that is a point I made earlier on. It's not that long ago that the country was under 3 million, and it won't be that long. It'll be this decade where the country will be on. We went up about 7%, and we go up another. We'll be very close to 6 million. Dublin, as we know, the whole county, is a huge part of that, and the challenge and what you're engaged in is the challenge of how do we have the best system to manage and handle the administration of that. And it is my strong view that a system that takes in that we don't have differences in policy in different parts of the county, where people are working together, where councils have more time, as they do in other countries, to be able to do the job, and that we attract at the staffing level, that we attract very good people, as we've traditionally done down the years. I mean, that is the big challenge for us. It's not an easy job. I mean, you're regularly dealing now with projects that are into the billions. And if you're talking about, we all know the housing difficulties, but with the housing comes all the infrastructure. And very soon you're going to have the redevelopment of Dublin Port and all of these are huge projects, and are going to require a good system. And I think the more coherent that system is, the more simple, straight line system that is the best. Too many hands in the pie will just make it more difficult. And it's not just about devolving this power, that power. It's just how that system works. And I like systems that are coherent and straightforward, that you know who the boss is, you know what the committee is, and you know what their agenda is. Too much of my political life was spent working with about 8 organisations trying to find out what the agenda was, and that I don't like. So I think it's what Lorraine said. It's to make it better and simpler, and that's what we should be trying to do. Thank you, Chairman.
So, Mr. Bertie Ahern, on behalf of the Dublin Citizens Assembly, we would like to thank you for taking time out of your indeed busy schedule to be with us this morning. It's been a really informative session. It's given us lots of food for thought, which we will debate over the course of today and the months ahead. And your passion for Dublin is infectious. So, Gur Míle Mágat, Assembly members, please give Mr. Bertie Ahern a round of applause. Gur Mágat.